After John Tunstall's murder, 5 months of guerrilla warfare raged throughout Lincoln County. The Murphy-Dolan boys were behind the killing of Mr. Tunstall, and the regulators demanded hand-delivered karma and revenge. Tunstall's foreman, Richard Brewer, was deputized and elected captain of the regulators, who were made up of ranch hands of Tunstalls, converted into gunmen. Some of them were straight up hired as gunmen. And soon after, the revenge killings of William McCluskey, Frank Baker, William Morton, Sheriff Brady, and Deputy Hindman sent shockwaves through the mountains and valleys of Lincoln County. Tucked away in an isolated area at about 6,600 feet in elevation is Blazer's Mill. The spot is about 50 miles southwest of Lincoln and became a popular rest stop as it was about a third of the way on the road to Mesilla. Blazer's Mill had become a popular stopping place for travelers going from one of these towns to the other, like a roadhouse. It was owned by Dr. Joseph Hoy Blazer, who was born in Pennsylvania in 1829. He later moved to the Midwest, where he opened a dentist shop in Mount Pleasant, Iowa. He served in the Army and was released after an injury when a horse fell on him. He came out west out of fears of having tuberculosis. Blazer settled along Tularosa Creek after purchasing the mill with a partner named George Nesmith. The property had a large 2-story house and an office building on top of a big hill. The rest of the buildings were scattered below: a sawmill, a grist mill, and several adobe structures, including a general store, post office, and several corrals and barns. Inside the office building on the hilltop were 4 large rooms. Dr. Blazer occupied one as an office in the building, and the Godfroys occupied the other 3. Mr. Godfroy, Indian agent to the Mescalero Apache, held an office in this building. His wife made use of another room, turning it into a restaurant. And the last room, the Godfroys used as living quarters for them and their kids. Soon after, word got out about her delicious cooking, and Blazer's Mill became a known spot for serving good meals. 3 days after the ambush killing of Sheriff Brady and Deputy Hindman, on April 4th, 1878, Billythekid and the Regulators were nearby. They were possibly waiting to ambush Judge Bristol and District Attorney Reinerson, as they would have been coming up the road from Mesilla in response to Sheriff Brady's killing. The boys became hungry and tired and stopped at Blazer's Mill. Among them were Richard Brewer, George and Frank Coe, John Middleton, Doc Skurlock, Charlie Beaudry, and Billythekid. Some other accounts also include Henry Brown, Frank McNabb, Big Jim French, Dirty Steve Stevens, and Fred Waite also present at the mill that day, which seems pretty likely. The group is greeted by Dr. Blazer himself, who is friendly with the Coes and invites them into his home. Dr. Blazer requests, "Stay for dinner, boys. I'll have the cook fix you dinner and feed your horses." As he spoke, he noticed a man in the distance and warned the boys that they might have a tail on their trail. Richard Brewer, captain of the Regulators, suggests that 2 men stand guard while the others eat. George Coe and John Middleton volunteer. Middleton and George Coe waited on the porch with their guns cocked and lying on their laps as the rest of the boys were inside filling their bellies. A half an hour goes by, and true to Dr. Blazer's assumption, it appeared that someone may have been trailing them. A heavily armed man rode up the hill and right up to George and Middleton. The man was Buckshot Roberts. George Coe remembers he offered no words or greeting and crawled off his mule armed with 2 6-shooters, a rifle, and a 12-inch belt full of cartridges. Andrew Buckshot Roberts was in his late 40s in 1878. He was also known as Bill Williams and was a very quiet man. He reportedly usually kept to himself. Roberts previously served as a Texas Ranger and also fought in the Civil War and made sergeant. Roberts had earned the nickname Buckshot because of a load of buckshot embedded in his right shoulder, altering his movement in his upper right arm, which he could no longer raise past his waist. This gave him a unique shooting style, shooting from the hip, quick, and before expected. Roberts owned a small ranch in the Ruidoso Valley and worked for James Dolan. When things heated up, Buckshot wanted out. He sold his ranch, and some reports suggest Roberts was not trailing the boys, but was just looking to get his mail from the post office at the mills while expecting a check for the ranch he had just sold. Just then, the boys stepped out onto the porch. Roberts quickly recognized Frank Coe and finally spoke up. "Coe, I need to speak with you for a moment." Frank and Roberts walked around to the other side of the house and sat down to talk. At the same time, Middleton and George went inside to eat their grub and returned. After returning, they found Richard Brewer having a conference with the boys and was wanting to take Roberts at whatever the consequences were to be. Frank was aware of Brewer's intentions, but didn't want to see Roberts dead, so he tried to convince him to surrender. Frank Coe recalls, "We talked for a half an hour. I begged him to surrender, but the answer was no, no, no. I think he was the bravest man I ever met. He was not a bit excited. He said, 'I'll be damned if I surrender to them. They just killed Morton and Baker, and I'll fight them to the last ditch.'" Captain Brewer was growing impatient and said, "Boys, he's a bad hombre. He's well armed, and I ain't gonna ask anyone to go around the house and get him. But will anyone volunteer?" Charlie Beaudry and George Coe volunteered, and Billythekid stepped up and said, "I'd sure hate to miss the frolic. I guess I better go with you." Brewer was pleased when the 3 boys went around the house with Beaudry in the lead and their guns out. When they got around the corner, Roberts was still seated in the doorway next to Frank. Beaudry commanded Roberts to throw his hands up, as Frank stood and stepped aside. Roberts replied in a fervent tone, "Not much, Mary Ann," and raised his gun to his waist. Beaudry had his gun already fixed on Roberts, and they both fired concurrently. Beaudry's bullet went right into Roberts' mid-torso, probably the ball that sealed his fate. Roberts' bullet ricocheted off Beaudry's gun belt and into the right hand of George Coe, knocking his gun to the ground. The hot lead had taken off George's trigger finger. Panicking, George ran right through the front of the fight. Roberts continues to fire his weapon. A bullet grazed through the front of George's vest and shirt at an angle, tearing a hole through them. Another struck John Middleton in the chest, just missing his heart. As George Coe makes it to cover, Brewer was enraged and yelling, "I'll get him at any cost." Buckshot Roberts backed into a room and grabbed a single-shot 1873 45-60 Springfield rifle off the wall. While weakening, he was able to pull a feather mattress onto the floor. He laid down on it, cocked his gun, and was ready to fight until the end. Brewer pinned Roberts' location and ran down to a footbridge at the creek at the bottom of the hill and took position a little more than 100 yards from the house. Peeking over a pile of logs, Brewer shoots into the doorway at Roberts. Frank Coe remembers, the bullet just shaved the door facing. After spotting the gun smoke from Brewer's gun, Roberts finds his location and waits for his head to pop up. As soon as Brewer's head pops up, Roberts fired with the big Springfield. The slug hits Brewer's left eye, blowing out the back of his head, leaving Captain Regulator Richard Brewer dead. Dr. Blazer then suggests, "Boys, I'll go around where I can see him, and see how badly he is wounded." Dr. Blazer called out to Roberts, "I am Dr. Blazer, the man of the house. Can I come in and help you in any way?" Roberts replies, "No, I am killed. No one can help me. It's all over." Dr. Blazer bravely entered and saw the dying man bleeding out onto the mattress and returned to the boys. "There is no use in fighting any longer. That fellow in there won't last another hour." The Regulators decided to skin out, leaving Richard Brewer's corpse and George Coe's trigger finger behind. Frank Coe remembers helping Middleton afterwards. "I took Middleton down to the big spring that furnished the water for the mill after he was wounded. He got down and drank until I had to turn him over to keep him from falling into the water. We got an ambulance down there and brought him and George back to the Ruidoso in it. Lucky for the boys, on the way back they ran into Dr. Gordon, a physician from Fort Stanton, who was responding to a telegraph about a wounded man at Blazer's Mill. The doctor did what he could to help Middleton and Coe, and then continued on his way to Blazer's, where he discovered there was nothing he could do for Mr. Roberts before he died. It is rumored that the bodies of Regulator Captain Richard Brewer and Andrew Buckshot Roberts were buried in one large coffin with markers side by side. Much later, during an interview with the newspaper man who was asking Billythekid about Blazer's Mill, Billythekid replied, "It was too hot there for me.